everybody. Welcome back to Eggs, the podcast. Today's special guest is Jones Loflin. Jones, how are you, man? Welcome to the show.
No, I'm doing fantastic, Ryan. Thanks for the opportunity to be on today and talk about things that are important to your listeners.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. So let's maybe start at the beginning. Let's get a little bit of background on who you are and what you do.
Sure, absolutely. I am a author and professional speaker. I've been doing this for about 30 years, primarily around the areas of work-life balance, leadership development, and time management. Those are really the three buckets that people utilize my services for. And so keynote speaking occupies a lot of my days. Also been the author of several books, which I'm sure we'll get into some of that today. But my big mantra is that my goal is to help people make the best choices with their time so they can thrive in the ways that are important to them.
Yeah, no, and I think that's amazing. And this is actually one of the things that I'm really excited to talk to you about is the notion of choice. I think a lot of us get kind of caught up in our rat race and we do what we do, but we kind of do a lot of things without even really thinking about it. We just get caught up in sort of our entrepreneurial venture and we're just putting one foot in front of the other and trying our best to just move forward. But we don't realize that we actually do have the power for conscious choice in a lot of the things that we're doing. And so I think your emphasis on choice is actually a very critical thing, because I think a lot of people make choices every day, but they don't think about it as being a choice, that I made a decision. Right. I think a lot of people just go, oh, well, I had to do X because of Y, or whatever it is. And I don't think they're putting that much thought into it. But I think the power of choice will give the people an opportunity to really take ownership over their career, their business, whatever it is they're looking for. I think just recognizing the power of choice, I think, can be really valuable for people.
Oh, absolutely. Because so often, as you said, we kind of get automated with our schedules, with our activities, the things we do in our day, and we don't stop and ask ourselves, are these the activities that are going to contribute to that business success or that team success that I really want? Or am I just doing these things because they're comfortable and that's what I typically do? And I haven't taken the time to stop and plan. Well, if I didn't make that choice, what is the choice I would make that would be a better use of my time and energy?
Yeah, so maybe let's dig in on choice a little bit, and let's maybe do it from the perspective of empowerment. So, a lot of the people who listen to this show are the whole full spectrum, from very successful CEOs and business leaders all the way down to just out of college, maybe trying to get started. Like, let's talk about choice in the frame of hey, you're a business person, you've decided basically to go forward in business at all. How can we maintain keeping choice, or, sort of, I guess, top of mind, and recognize that choice is a big part of our day?
Yeah. I'll jump into one of my metaphors, Ryan, and because one of the things I do is I teach a lot from metaphors and analogies. One of them is that your work in life is like a three-ring circus, and that you have three rings, work ring, a self ring, a relationship ring. We can get into that if time allows. But one of the key parts of that metaphor is that you are the ringmaster of your circus. That doesn't mean you're in control of everything, but it does mean you are in control of certain parts of your day, your time, your energy. And so recognizing what you're the ringmaster of, I think, is critical, especially when you're deciding to move forward in business. Is what are those things that I can influence the outcome of with how I use my time and energy versus those things I have no control over or very little control over. And sometimes just stopping to ask ourselves that question, where can I be, a better ringmaster? Where can I be a better steward of my time to get the outcomes I want, is a place for people to start to make better choices with how they empower themselves and their teams in their business.
Yeah, no, I love that. And this metaphor of the three-ring circus is really great too, because one thing I think it does particularly well that isn't maybe common in the way people talk about it, you mentioned work-life balance being one of the things that you talk about. And I think there was a period there where work-life balance became sort of a metaphor for being lazy. And it was like, hey, I need to have this time off, I've worked too much, and so it became really subjective. It was like, hey, man, I worked 4 hours today. It's a lot for me. I need some work-life balance here. I got to chill out, So I think it became a little bit of a pejorative for a little while, which was that a lot of these sort of business gurus and stuff were going into this discussion of life or work-life balance. But I think that, especially in the entrepreneur's journey, there's a lot of crossover between work and life. And, a lot of times if they're chasing a passion, life could be work, for example.
Yeah.
And so how do we, I guess, to stick on the theme of choice, how do we make the best choices to make sure that we're getting that work-life balance, maybe without becoming sort of the trope of, being the lazy guy or giving yourself permission to chill?
Yeah. I love that. I love that question because I use the term work-life balance, and Ryan, I feel that term to me reminds me of when somebody says, hand me a Kleenex. Well, what they mean is a tissue, but Kleenex is just what we say, right?
Sure.
And so I think when we say work-life balance, I think that's the wrong term, but it's what we know it by. It's what we use. If I said work-life integration or work-life success, it holds different meaning. And so in your question about how do we maintain that, I talk about it's not about balance in your life. It's about being in the right ring at the right moment. So if you're an entrepreneur and you've got 4 hours in front of you in your workday, you know where you need to be. You need to be in that work ring. You don't need to be, doom scrolling on your phone or other device. You don't need to be working on other things. You need to be giving your full time and energy to whatever the task, the activity, the meetings that's going to, move your business forward. Now, when you have some discretionary time at the end of the day or at the beginning of the day, I think it's important to say, okay, right now is probably not a good time to be in my work ring. I need to be, working out, or I need to be taking a little time for myself to improve my personal wellness, my energy, so that when I jump back into the work ring, I'm ready. To tackle things more effectively. And when I'm not at work, what's my opportunity to be more engaged with the relationships in my life, my significant other, my children, my friends, my community, because all of those things give us the energy, physical, mental, and emotional, to be our best selves at work. But too often, entrepreneurs, they don't have balance. And I get that. I'm an entrepreneur myself. There are times you may have to have 18-hour days for work because you've got this project or something you got to get out the door. The key is when that project is over, or when you notice that you're beginning to have some discretionary time, what's the best use of that time that will renew that physical, mental, and emotional energy so that you can return to the work ring when it's time with that same level of passion and fervor that you had previously.
Well, and that's the thing. And like looking at your sort of metaphor of the three ring circus, I mean, being an odd number, it's maybe difficult to see exactly how that balances. But I think that's kind of a good metaphor for life, right? So it's not 2 and 2 and we can split it right down the middle. It's real easy. Instead, there's kind of this middle ground where you're sort of, I don't know, if you squish those three rings together and it becomes kind of a Venn diagram, you've got like this middle area that's sort of the, today I had to work the 18-hour day, or you know what, this weekend I get to go with the family, or whatever it is. And so I think that framing the balance that way makes more sense to me than this notion of, oh, okay, well, maybe I've worked too long today, or, because I think it gets really hard for people to make the decision that it's like, I've worked too much, or today is the day I need to stop, or, whatever it is. Like, I think that choice gets hard for people. So they instead don't make it, and they just work too long and ruin their family. They give too much to others and not enough to themselves, whatever it is, but they're out of whack. And because of that, or maybe not even seeing that they have choice in the matter, or the ability to make a choice around that, they get kind of caught up in whatever, path or pattern they're in, and they don't stop and make time for, themselves or for others.
Yeah. When I'm talking with audiences, one of the questions I love to ask at the beginning of a presentation, especially if it's on work-life success or burnout or overload, I'll say, in your drive to get it all done, what's not getting done or not getting done well? And it's fascinating, Ryan, the answers that people will share. Some of them will say, Jones, it's the strategic stuff. I'm just caught in working in my business instead of own my business. Others will say, I don't have time for myself to exercise, to get good sleep. Others will say, I have no time for my family because I'm doing all these other things. And what's interesting about it is that if I'll ask the next question, especially if it's in a coaching session or even in a large audience, I might say to that individual, I'll say, what would it look like if you were getting to those things? And it's not like they're asking for, I need 3 hours a day for a nap. That'd be nice. But they're like, Jones, if I just had 30 minutes for myself, or, Jones, if I could spend an hour with my significant other after dinner, that's what, Jones, if I could take 15 minutes and pull away from the business each day just to say, where are we going? What do we need to be doing differently? That would work for me. And then, Ryan, the great part is, then it's just a matter of plug and play. It's a process. Okay, let's start looking, using the circus analogy, let's start looking at your acts and your circus, the activities you've got, and what could you change? What could you take out? What could you do differently so that those types of activities started showing up in your day, in your week, so that you didn't feel so overwhelmed and you were making those choices, to your point, that are life-giving instead of life-draining.
Yeah, no, I love that. Well, and I wonder if we can maybe dwell a little bit on taking care of the self, because I
Mhm.
think that that's one of the areas that's maybe most often left out. Even if you're balancing between work and life being, your interpersonal relationships, your family,
Mhm.
your friends, those kinds of people. And I can speak from my own experience, having abandoned a lot of those people
Oh,
early in my career when I spent a lot of time working and less time living.
yeah.
I think for a lot of people, the person who gets left out most of the time is you.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people think of that as like a cheap thing to do, right? And even now, I mean, God, I'm 45 now, and like, I mean, I've just now in the last month started a routine where I, instead of getting up and getting showered and dressed for the day, I get up, I put on gym clothes, and I'm prepared to go in the room 5 feet away
Yes.
and get a
Yes.
workout every now and then, and it's like, and it's like I'm trying to get that routine under, but for
Mhm.
many years I convinced myself I didn't have time to do that.
Yeah.
Now I'm getting older, and I monitor my health numbers and metrics
Mhm.
pretty closely. And
Mhm.
so I'm going, oh man, I gotta start making some changes because I'm getting old. And
Oh, that's
and
funny.
so, but it's stuff that, like, I think for your average entrepreneur or for your workaholics and your people like that, like, to stop and actually take time for
Mhm.
self feels selfish.
Mhm.
And so
Oh,
I wonder if
absolutely.
you'd talk a little bit about just sort of the choice of taking care of yourself, and how, I
Yeah.
mean, maybe that, among other non-obvious things,
Yeah.
are, actually better for you in the long run, or you end up doing
Mhm.
better by taking that time, even though you feel like you need to work all day.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Um, I love to ask that question, almost like you mentioned it, Ryan, is that, I will say, I'll just start with, I was working with, I was in a presentation, and after it was over, there was someone who was a mom of several children. She's like, Jones, I just never have time for myself. I'm always taking care of my kids and other people. And I was talking to her about taking some time. Oh, I just can't, because, I got to be there for my kids. And I asked her this question. I said, how would you be a better mom if you took 15 minutes for yourself first thing each morning? She immediately said, I'd be more patient with my children. I would be more present with them. And I think you can take that example into any of the rings, if you will. So for an entrepreneur, I could ask an entrepreneur and say, how would you be more effective in your work if you took 15 minutes at lunch and disconnected? They would say, I'd probably not feel as resentful towards the work in the afternoon. I would be more attentive. I wouldn't feel like it was just one more thing. And especially in the realm of creativity, we know any creative will tell you that, yeah, you're going to be deep into it for a while, but then you got to get away. Because that's when your mind makes those connections that it can't rationally make, and that's when some of your best ideas come up. Is when you disconnect, when you're exercising, when you're taking a walk outside. And so it's not just it is a self-care thing, but to me, it's also an opportunity to come up with the best ideas. I mean, I have to be creative in my work, and I don't get my best creative ideas sitting in front of my laptop or my computer or whatever. I get my best ideas when I think, I need to think about that. And then I'll go walk outside for maybe, 15, 30 minutes, or, I'll just step away from it. But so much value to saying to yourself, I'm going to be of greater value to my business, my team, and my family if I were to look after me, because they need me to be at my best when I'm with them.
Yeah. Well, and as a person who works in creative industry, I run a design agency. I mean, for us, I mean, like, obviously this creative example that you just used, hits close to home for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because I think of when I sit down at the computer, like, that's execution time. Like, the thought
Yes.
is
Yes.
done. Like, now I'm
Yes.
acting on the thought, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
like we had the thought to build the website, or we had the thought to design the logo, or we had the thought for whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But now it's time to just do it. So now we're
Mm-hmm.
just executing on the idea, and we're dedicating all those resources, that, sort of the mental capacity to
Mm-hmm.
development of the actual idea. But the thought was done in the shower or whatever, and
Yeah.
this is actually in agencies where they have so much trouble, is because you've got the bean counters on the front end, who are your client services and people like that, who are interfering with the customers and trying
Yeah.
to explain why they're charging so much. And meanwhile,
Mm-hmm.
the creatives are going, well, yeah, but I got to have an hour of chill if I'm going to stop and think about this, or we need to be
Exactly.
able to go off site and do this or that, and it's hard to put those things into practical numbers. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, well, we can't charge by the hour, because if we do, like, we need 6 hours of chill time just to think about this. So it's like, so it's a pretty tough sell. And so it ends up driving creative people to this point where they're working crazy hours and they do all this other stuff. So it's actually really negative for creative people.
Yeah.
And I imagine it's similar for your entrepreneurs or people in, any given industry that requires thought to do work.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause you said it best, that's the execute. We're so focused on execution because that's what makes us feel productive, is actually taking the action on something versus just being. One of my many, I love to read, in a book several years ago by Jay Shetty, Think Like a Monk. A lot of your listeners will have heard of it, but he talked about the whole cadence of Franciscan monks is from being to doing to being. And he says, unfortunately, in our culture, in the West, it's all about doing. And then when we're exhausted, we'll be for just a couple minutes. Then let's go do it again. But I love that, starting from, okay, now I'm going to go execute a while. Now, after I've executed for a while, that's very draining. Now I'm going to step back and just be, whether that's, taking time for yourself, personal renewal, those. Now I'm going to be more effective when I go back to the doing part again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because it's kind of non-obvious, and there are a lot of these sort of business truths, I guess, that are non-obvious, and then when you do them, it's like, oh yeah, that kind of works.
Exactly.
And so it's funny how that works. We had a guest on the show last week, this guy Bob Berg, and Bob is behind this thing called the Go-Giver movement.
Yep.
And in my conversation with him, we were talking about how, as an entrepreneur, I feel like I hit these invisible walls every now and then. Like, I'm a really good starter, but when it comes to actually getting this thing out into public or actually selling a product or whatever, like, I seem to hit this invisible barrier. And this is something I run into. I think other entrepreneurs can probably relate, but there's something that happens there where I run into this thing, and I guess I should feel somewhat enlightened in that I recognize the barrier when I'm hitting it, but I still haven't found my way around it yet. And so he recommended this book called Psycho-Cybernetics. It's I think it's an older book, but but it talks a lot about this. But one of the big focuses, I mean, it has a lot to do with self-image and sort of giving yourself permission to do the thing that you want to do, right? It's sort of a methodology for getting to the next level emotionally. But what I like about it, or what it's actually done for me, and I mean, I'm only about halfway through it, but in reading it for the last week, it's really caused me to stop and think about my business. And I'm not sure I'm doing it right yet. Like, I've still got some work to do on this, but it's just, even in these few days of reading has given me this extra layer of, I wake up in the morning, my alarm goes off, and then I'm laying there for 20 minutes and just kind of thinking about the business. Where could this go? And all this thing. And I've had a lot of insights this week that are like, oh, well, that's interesting. I never thought about that. And now that connects to this, and this connects to that. And, and all it is finding that little bit of time for yourself. It is just taking that little bit of time. So I found that it's been real interesting. But one of the things I wanted to talk to you, and maybe you can kind of discuss this idea of this invisible barrier, this thing that holds people back from whatever the next level is, framed again through choice, but it's how do we make choices even when the outcome is unknown?
Yeah. I see that a lot with the people I work with sometimes. And part of the challenge there, you mentioned the key word, there's the unknown. Everybody wants to know, they want to know a known outcome. If I do this, this is going to happen. And so, especially for entrepreneurs and creatives, they don't know that this action they're going to take is going to guarantee them an outcome. And so I'll fall back on one of my favorite quotes that I heard back in the 80s, back before many of your listeners were probably even born. But there was a quote by Zig Ziglar, a motivational speaker, who said, "Go as far as you can see by faith. And when you get there, you can see farther." And every time I'm stuck and I'm afraid to take that next step, I think about that quote, like, okay, what's the next step I can take? What can I do instead of what can't I do, or what is the outcome going to be? And I find there's always a next step to take. Maybe it's, okay, I need to ship this or send this rough draft out to someone, or I need to toss this idea to one of my trusted advisors to say, what do you think? There's always a next step. I think the challenge for many people is they just want to be able to choose step 15 when right now they need to choose step number 2. Execute there, and then see what information it gives you. And then once you have that information and that momentum, then you're going to be able to figure out what the next step is.
Yeah. And like I say, this book has been helping me quite a bit with this. Cause like, I mean, this is, I mean, in my experience, so as a guy who began life as a freelance graphic designer and then basically had to add on to my skill set in order to become a more attractive graphic or freelancer over the years, I've learned a lot of things. So I became this kind of jack of all trades, and I'm really capable of doing a lot of stuff. So when it comes to these business ideas, I can get it branded, I can get the website built, I can get all these things done. But then I hit this barrier when it's like, okay, well, now it's time to go to market. And that's where I always run into the wall. And so, but to your point, I do the things I can see, which is, the brand all the way through to actually ready to launch. Like we're on the launching pad already. And then I just kind of wash my hands of it and walk away, and I'm on to the next idea, and so I have a ton of these like false starts, that I call them. And it's just, but it's hitting that thing. And then I'm hopeful that through this book and some of the things that we've discussed already, this notion of maybe taking a little more time for myself, taking a little more time to think, because the problem is I just sit down and execute every day, so it's like, okay, well, I already know we need a website. I'll build the website. No problem. So we're on the way and we're doing that, but I'm not going, okay, well, why are we building the website? And what's the thing that's going to come after that? And who's going to buy this? And what are they going to pay for it? And it's like, there's all these other things, and when I stop and I start to think about it logically, most of the answers start to come. Right. And I go to your point and using Zig. And I love that you use Zig Ziglar, because I used to work for this guy named Don Aslett, who's the world's #1 cleaning expert. And he was a big Zig Ziglar guy when he was eating. And so Zig's a cool one that you used. But the point is that, being able to identify the next step comes with taking that time to think about it. So whether you see that as thinking, whether you put that in your self bucket, which is you taking time to just be in your own head, or if you consider that work, and part of your work should be allowed to sit and think about work and what you want to do with work, I think a lot of the answers will start to present themselves. And maybe there shouldn't be so much pressure on trying to make the snap decision, but rather making the choice to spend time on those things and live with them a little bit. And then like sort of the next batch of choices will come a little more easily.
Yeah. Giving yourself time to think is just, in fact, Juliet Funt, talk about books for a moment, A Minute to Think. Phenomenal book about how we have so diminished our ability to be effective, both professionally and personally, because we don't give ourselves that minute to think. And it is so valuable when we will stop and begin to make those connections. I mentioned I like to read a lot of books. I'll give you another one. Building a Second Brain. I think it's Tiago Forte. He has a process in there. It's called CODE, collect, organize, distill, and express. And I have found, Ryan, for me, that's been very helpful when I'll have this new idea and I'll go, oh, wow. But then what happens is I get so afraid because I'm like, how do I execute? But then I have to remember the model. You start with collect, building the ideas, pulling together those ideas, which takes a lot of time. And then giving yourself that space to organize them. Then, okay, what is a distillation? What does this look like if I begin to kind of refine it? And then how can I express this? I mean, I follow the same process when I write a blog or when I'm creating a new presentation. Is that I don't immediately run to that expression. How's this going to land with an audience? No, I collect first, I organize it, then I'll begin to refine it. And then, okay, now I'm ready to look at expression some way. And so there's so many tactics and strategies that I think can help us get across that hump. My co-author for my book, Juggling Elephants, Todd Musig, gave me a phrase when we met 20 some years ago, because he could recognize that in me. And he says, Jones, you need to do more ready, fire, aim. Excuse me? He said, yeah, ready, fire, aim. You need to ready, fire, aim more of your ideas. That has been so helpful to me over the years, whether it's an example I want to use in a presentation, whether it's a question I want to try in a coaching session because I'm just feeling like I want to ask it, whether it's some content I want to develop for a book, is put it out there in some way and then refine it. Stop trying to have it perfect before I put it out to the world. That's been another way. I'm sorry. I'm rambling here with all these ideas, but it's just, I'm connecting with you. Yeah.
Well, and what I love about that too, though, is, I mean, it kind of pertains to what I had asked a few minutes ago, which is, taking or making a decision even when the choice is unknown.
Yes.
Or the outcome is unknown. And I think that this, I mean, some people might put it as faith or maybe trust in yourself, right?
Sure.
And so this is goes back to this notion about sort of the self relationship and being able to understand the relationship that you've built with yourself. I mean, in part of being an entrepreneur or an artist or, anything is you've got to have some level of faith in yourself or your own ability, right? If you're an artist and you're going to paint something and you're going to put it out for people to see, like, you must have some faith in yourself that you gave what you could give to that, or that you put this little bit of yourself into that. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs approach business that way too, right? I mean, they're chasing a thing that they're passionate about, but they're putting themselves in this thing. And then I'm bearing myself to you, the open market, to buy my thing. Yeah. And I mean, I'm sure there are variations of that, but there are plenty of people go into business that don't care what they're doing. But I think a lot of, entrepreneurs generally are probably a little bit more passionate about it. So I think that that's interesting. I wonder do you have any, I guess, ideas or thoughts around the notion of sort of developing self-trust and building this relationship with yourself where you can rely on yourself to do the thing? And it's like, my action or the decision I make may be wrong, but that's okay because I trust myself that I'm doing the right thing for me. And, maybe it won't work out and we'll have to adapt or whatever. But I think, to your point, there's so many people who are caught up in myself included in some respects. It's got to be perfect. It's got to be just right. Like, I'm not rolling out until I've got it just right, when really, I don't know, roll it out and see what the market thinks, but I think if you don't trust yourself, it's hard to get there.
Yeah, that's true. You have to, and I think that goes back to that space you talk about of reflection is, when is a time that you took a step into the unknown and you won or you learned something. And we all have those moments, Ryan, when we have been courageous enough to say, I'm going to try this. And maybe we didn't get the outcome we wanted, but we learned something. What did you learn from that? Okay, now what can you use in this next situation with that learning that you just got? But if you don't ever take that step, you're never going to learn. There's a whole thing I saw in USA Today many years ago about small businesses and how to help them succeed, because small businesses, of course, as your listeners would say, are afraid of failing. And this author said, or this writer said, well, yeah, you should expect to fail. You should expect to fail fast. In other words, get your ideas to market quickly, see, get feedback. You should fail forward, meaning that when you try something, what did it move forward that you now can take another step on? You should fail smart. In other words, what can you learn from that failure? Fail cheap. Okay, that's one of my personal favorites. Is that if you're gonna try an idea, don't just go all in with that idea. How can you move it forward in an inexpensive way to test it, and then finally fail with integrity? In other words, have the right idea in mind. I'm doing this because it aligns with my values, with what I'm passionate about. And sure, you're going to fail. But if you fail in those ways and you're cognizant of what you're learning, you're going to succeed eventually. But if you don't take those steps, you're not going to get that opportunity to see what'll work.
Yeah, it's one of the things that we've learned excuse me, in doing this podcast is that, because you'll be like our, 450th interview or something like that. And, so we've met a lot of business leaders, we've talked to a lot of folks, but what we find is that everybody's perception is overnight success. But almost everybody is what we've started to call the 10-year overnight success, which is that, we see your grand success today, but we didn't see the last decade that you spent doing it. And to your point, or, about this idea about failing fast and failing forward, that's what most of these people do. Most of these CEOs have a number of failures in their wake. They have a number of, half-cracked idea that didn't work, but that caused me to pivot here, or it gave me the idea to do that, or, whatever it is. Or we built a business and it was going okay, and we learned to optimize it and do better, And so, there's a lot of ways to move forward. But the point is that, give yourself a little grace. Like, it's okay to, it's okay to not be perfect the first time. It's not expected that you should be. And I think that, people, especially with the sort of the rise of social media and things like that, have been exposed to a lot of this stuff where you're seeing this, fake version of a person's
highlight
life.
Reel.
Yeah. Highlight reel is a great way of putting it. Where you're seeing, some entrepreneurs, I'm getting on my yacht and I just got out of my Ferrari and I've got my model girlfriend and whatever. But it's like, but the reality is that, this is a show they're putting on for people. Yeah. And, now maybe there are plenty of, Bezoses out there or whatever that are billionaires that have done their thing. But a guy like a Bezos would be the first one to tell you he didn't do it overnight. He built that business over time, and it just happened to hit at the right time and all that stuff. And he got lucky. But also along with luck came a lot of hard work and a lot of effort and a lot of other stuff. There's no free rides, almost regardless who you are.
Right.
And so,
Right.
so I think it's really important to do that stuff. But I like the idea of, I think we live in a time, maybe now so more than ever, where the amount of risk it requires to go out in business is maybe lower than ever. It's
Yes.
cheaper to print things. It's cheaper to, get a prototype to market. It's cheaper to get software built. It's cheaper to, everything you might want to do in terms of trying to launch a business is cheaper and more efficient today than maybe any other time in history. And so this idea of, being willing to fail and all these things, like, it's almost like, I mean, we need to get comfortable with this notion because it's like so affordable now to fail. It's like, I mean, when your Henry Fords had the opportunity to fail, if things didn't work, well, it's okay. We're bankrupt. We live on the farm. We're eating dirt. We're doing whatever, but it's like, but nowadays, like, you can fail and then just go take a part-time job at 7-Eleven while you work it out and it'll be fine.
Yeah.
So it's like the risk isn't so great. And so knowing that, I think for a lot of entrepreneurs that are maybe waiting to get into the game or are afraid to take that next big step, I think that maybe trying to understand that, risk maybe isn't as high as you once thought it was is maybe a good thing to consider moving forward.
Oh, I mean, Ryan, thank you for that. That's a fascinating idea. I kind of knew that, but you articulated it so well that, yeah, what have you, it's that old phrase, what have you got to lose? Because it is so easy to be entrepreneurially minded and move into something and to try it and to see how it works. And if it doesn't work, okay, I'm going to go back to this thing over here. That is such a powerful point. For people to remember that moving in a direction like that, especially when there's lower risk because of age or financial,
even just think of technology. I mean, for example, AI technology has enabled me, who's always been a designer, to be able to build websites, build applications, build things that I never could have done before. And it may not be pro quality, it may not be perfect, but by God, I have working websites and working apps, and they do exactly what I need them to do. And it's all empowered by technology. And so I can pay $20 a month to build a thing that used to would have cost me thousands of dollars, And so for me to risk it or put my neck out for this, I'm $40 invested into this website versus tens of thousands or a home equity loan or whatever, it's like, you can do so much more with so much less, I guess, now than you used to, that I think that's a real positive for entrepreneurship in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll also add the challenge I think that it creates is that you've got to figure out, and we've always said this, you've got to figure out how to differentiate yourself. Because the bar is lower and it's easier for more people to move into a market or to be entrepreneurs, you've got to figure out, how do I set myself apart? And yes, AI and other tools will help you to accelerate your ability to be out there, but how are you different? I see that in my own world as a professional speaker and author. I mean, there's more books being produced now than ever. As a professional speaker, people who want to get into the speaking community or market or industry, it's easier than ever because, as you said, websites are easy. Video footage, it used to be $5,000 a finished minute for video. Wow. That's different these days.
Yeah. And you buy yourself an iPhone and you can do it yourself.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I was at a conference last week. It was hilarious. A guy was there and he had his big camera. And I said, "Oh, you must be the photographer." He said, "Yeah, I'd rather be using my iPhone, but in order for people to see me as a professional, I got to carry this phone around or this camera around. I got to carry this big camera around." I thought that, and later on during the presentation, when I was speaking, I saw he had his iPhone out a whole lot more than he had that big camera with the long lens.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah, it was fascinating. But I think that's the key that I always come back to is that how are you different? What is going to set you apart? And because so many of us are working with all these amazing tools now, you really do have to find that unique selling proposition or whatever we call it today that sets you apart, makes people want your product or service.
Yeah. And so maybe this is a good segue into one of the topics I wanted to cover with you, which is this notion of getting clarity on what we're doing. I think you do a little bit of speaking on this, and I think in your coaching in particular, you might help people focus on this. And I can speak again as a scatterbrain creative, that pinning down the goal or the target has always been a challenge for me, and trying to understand what it is that I actually want to do. I have a lot of notions and I have a lot of things that are like, oh, this would be a really cool thing if it did this, and it'd just be cool, right? Cool is the word. But it's like, okay, that's cool, but where are you actually going with this? Where's the target? And it's easy to get to San Diego if you can look at a map and figure out where San Diego is. But if you just say, hey, I'm going to San Diego, and you're sitting, I don't know, in a mountain pass somewhere, and you don't look at a map, it's like, okay, well, well, where is that? And so, so I think one of the things that struggles, and as we're pivoting off of risk reduction and faith in ourselves and being able to make good decisions, it seems like maybe getting clarity around what we're doing could be a really strong topic, or maybe something to focus on. I wonder if you talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. It's of critical importance. In fact, it's a big piece of my newest book, which came out in January, which is called Focused as a Bee. That's why I'm dressed the way I am today. For those who might actually be listening on the audio version. But the whole idea of outcomes and aligning the stuff you're doing today, this week, this month, this year, with the outcomes you want, I think is of critical importance. And I think it starts, I hate to be a broken record, but I think it starts with giving yourself that space to ask yourself that question. What's the outcome I want? I mean, the second half of the year, we've just started the second half of the year. And so I did some goal reflection on my goals yesterday. And because I was thinking about, okay, what do I want the second half of this year to look like? And I had to not just say, here are my goals, but I say, what's the outcome I want from the second half of the year? And I wrote down things like, I want to be successful. I want to be at peace. I want to be in better shape. And so then I started making some notes about, okay, well, in order to have that, what have I got to do? What are the choices I've got to make each day to get to that outcome? And so I think, a place to start for anyone who's listening is, well, Jones, I just don't really know what I want. I feel like, Ryan said, I'm a scattered creative as well, is that ask yourself that question. What's the outcome you want from this year? What would cause you to look back on 2025 and go, wow, that was a great year? What would happen? What would you be? How would you be if those things were, if you were to achieve those things? And I think if we get serious with ourselves, asking those questions, and then maybe even talk it through with a trusted friend. Of course, part of my world, I'm a professional coach. I coach, executives, middle managers, and other people. And you don't have to hire a coach, but find somebody to say, hey, you know me. Here's what I'm thinking I'd like to accomplish, in the next 6 months. Does that sound like me? What do you think? And they're probably going to look at you and they're going, what do you think? Does that get you excited? Does it motivate you to get out of bed and go do the things that you want to do? And if you say, well, not really, well, I think you better go back to the drawing board and start writing again. I think it all starts with that pulling away from the hamster wheel of the day and asking yourself some very pointed questions and sitting with those answers, I think is key.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And it's funny because you say, oh, I don't want to be a broken record. And what's really funny in, hundreds and hundreds of hours of these interviews, what we found is that, really like the core truths are the core truths, and I think that the way that, maybe a person, and this is what's really beautiful about people like you who are public speaking and writing books on the matter is like, you're not inventing the truth, but the way that you position the truth might be the way that it hits me, or the way that it connects with a listener or a reader or whomever. And so I think that that's what's so cool here is that if people really distill down what they need to do with their lives or what they're trying to do in their business or whatever, it really does just come down to this clarity. And the way you get this clarity is by spending time with self. And by the way, it's like, it's like, but the truth is just this core nugget and you probably could have got it in biblical times, but it's like, exactly. but somebody today said it in a way that resonates with you. And that's how it works. Right. We all have favorite authors and things like that who said things a certain way and that clicked with us. To bring back the aforementioned Bob Berg, he has this phrase that's, people do business with folks that they know, like, and trust, and I've used that phrase in my business since I was 19.
Wow.
Some radio executive I knew years and years and years ago mentioned that to me, and it stuck with me, just the way that it was phrased, just like that. So when I had the opportunity to meet Bob, I was just like, oh my God, dude, like you've been a part of my business all these years. And it's like, and it's not that it's, he didn't invent that idea. He didn't lots of people have articulated something similar. He just said it in a way that resonated with me. And so, and I think, like you're talking about here, and the way that you've delivered this notion of the 3-ring circus and things like that, I think really make space for the notion of taking care of self in addition to life, in addition to business. Yeah. And I think that gives people, I don't know, a framework to work within. So maybe if it hadn't clicked for them before, maybe it will now. And, as we get to some of these other questions that we've asked, and maybe we put the cart ahead of the horse a little bit and asking questions about, dodging the unknown and things like that. A lot of that comes from the clarity that comes from the time spent with self.
Yeah.
whether that's in the frame of business or in the ring of self-care or in the ring of even family time and talking to friends and trusted individuals. This is that core nugget there is the thing, and it unlocks all the things we've been talking about. So I think it's kind of interesting how that happens.
Yeah.
One of the things I want to talk about, so your book, Focused as a Bee, obviously it's a play off of the busy as a bee.
That's
right. And we touched on this earlier. You mentioned it, and I actually made a note here to go back to it, was this idea of feeling productive. There's a lot of people today that spend a lot of time doing a lot of things. And again, we've tiptoed around all the ideas around lack of clarity and things like that. But one of the things that happens is we get caught up doing the things we're doing and we feel like we're doing something, like it feels productive. I mean, it's like even doom scrolling on Twitter or whatever. It feels like you're doing something. Yeah. Oh yeah, no, I'm flipping and I'm responding and I'm, saying something terrible to somebody I don't know, like all the things that people do. And it's, but at the end of the day, it feels like I've done something. I've contributed to something in some way. Yeah. And so this feeling of busyness, I think, is something that people get addicted to. And to use the example you used earlier around the, thinking like a monk, we do in Western culture, especially. And, I'm going out to Spain here in a couple of weeks and they don't do it that way. And the first time I went out there years and years ago, that was maybe the most impactful moment for me, because at the time I was working for an ad agency and I was running my business. So between those two things, I was working from 7 a.m. to 2 a.m. Wow. I did that for 5 years. And, but stuff comes at the expense of that. You don't spend as much time with family. You don't spend any time with friends, things like that. So like now, like my social group is smaller and the people I see is more, are more infrequent. And, so that dedication cost me a lot of time, but boy, did I feel like I was getting a lot done, and now in retrospect, I'm going, man, I wish I had spent more time on those things. Because now as an older person, I'm going, well, crap, I should have spent more time building those relationships and having those friends. Now I'd have someone to go golfing with. And so it's kind of an interesting thing how the busyness bug here in the States, especially, and even more so maybe in the entrepreneurial community, for a long time was sort of applauded by people. It was this, who could work longer, who could spend more hours, who could do this and that. And that's kind of how you got your little gold star. But I wonder if you talk about, maybe to use your book as a good reference, focusing rather than just being busy.
Sure. In the book and in my presentation as well, I talk, presentation is probably the place I really zero in on this idea of honeybees and how honeybees, every action they take is toward the desired outcome of a healthy hive, of replicating, the colony for the future. In other words, as a beekeeper for the past 6 years, I can look at the activity that any bee within that hive is engaging in or coming into the hive, and I can go, I know why it's doing that. Now, it may take me a while to figure it out because I'm like, well, that seems kind of strange. But every action that every bee takes is aligned toward the outcomes they want. And then I'll ask my audiences sometimes, I'll say, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, how aligned would you say the actions you take each day are with the outcomes you're looking for? And you can tell people are getting uncomfortable because they know it's not 10. On a scale of 1 to 10, it might be a 6 or a 7. And part of the challenge is they haven't stopped to say, what's the outcome I want? What is it I'm all this work, what am I working toward? And in fact, I even mix metaphors and use those 3 rings we talked about earlier. And I was thinking, rate yourself in your 3 rings. Rate yourself for work, rate yourself for your self-ring, rate yourself for relationships. How aligned are the activities you're choosing with the outcomes you want? And then as people get their answer, I say, okay, if you were to move that number up 2, let's say you gave yourself a 5 in the work ring, what would you be doing if it were a 7? And people can immediately tell me, oh, you know what, I'd be investing more time in developing a certain team member, or I'd be looking at new products versus trying to hang on to the ones I'm currently marketing or selling or producing, that type of thing. It all goes back to thinking about what's the outcome I want and then aligning those outcomes. And that's not new. Going back to your idea, what did Covey say? Begin with the end in mind. Same concept. It's just shared a little different way, but I think that's where people need to start. What's the outcome I want from today, this week, this month, this year, my life? And then what are the activities that'll get me there?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I mean, like, to reference that book I was talking about earlier, that Psycho-Cybernetics, the big thing that's done for me is it's extended my vision, for example. So, so I had some clarity around what I'm building. I'm building this sports management business that's kind of on the side of everything else we do. But I just tried to get my oldest son recruited to play football, and I learned a lot about what's going wrong in that world. And so we're trying to spin up a new entity that will maybe address some of those issues. And so I had this very narrow focus that was like, okay, well, let's do this thing. It'll solve this thing, and that'll help. And but then in reading this book and trying to spend a little bit more time thinking and a little bit more time being purposeful about what I'm doing, it's like, okay, well, yeah, but what's the purpose? Like, it doesn't help my kid. He's 18 now, and he, didn't take the offer he got, and he's going to college. And so, that ship has sailed for him. I have a younger son, so maybe there's opportunity for him, but what does doing this do? And what I found for me is that for me, it helps student athletes of all creeds and colors find better opportunities, whether it's in college sports, professional sports, or maybe just in their own business as they leave as they don't go to college on sports or they don't go to professional sports, they've built a business and a reputation and all these other things that will help take them through. And so, but the idea is basically how can we improve the lives of student athletes and give them the best possible opportunities wherever it is, right? So even though it began as how do I help out my kid, like the grander scheme of it has started to be on or revealed to me a little bit and taking a little more time, all the way down to, really far out down the road kinds of things where it's like, well, could we build this like mega facility that tracked everyone's data, did all this, and it's like, but it's gone maybe a little haywire, like maybe I got to rein it in a little bit. But at the end of the day, the notion is the same. It's like, how can we help student athletes to get more out of their career, whether it's in sports or just in life beyond? And, and so for me, that's a nice little mission, that's a good thing for a lot of kids and a lot of people, and hopefully it'll help them out. And, but initially it was like, well, let's start with personal branding and stuff, because I own a marketing agency and we can do design work easy. And, this is a nice little bridge. And, and so, so it started out as being very product focused, and it's evolved to being much more people focused. And that all came through taking more time, thinking about it. And I think it's interesting too, as you, even just to use your 3-ring circus metaphor, 2 of the 3 things aren't work. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and I think that's probably a good metaphor, a good indicator for like how much time you should be spending on life. And I think that for a lot of people who may be chasing a passion, I think that there probably is more life in your work than you realize. Back to talking about squishing those together and making a little metaphor or a little Venn diagram of things. That it seems like that sweet spot between the 3 is probably where you find your most success.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And because all 3 of them, you're nourishing your energy from all 3 of those rings at that point. And finding that I think is really critical, Ryan. And I love what you talked about with you could just tell your passion as you talked about it. I could see or I could hear the number of words per second picking up a little bit when you figured out what it was that was driving you to want to create this thing. You thought it was this, it's not, but you're still interested in doing it. You're passionate about doing it. I have some activities that I used to engage in with my daughters, and I used to have some things I used to do in my work that I don't do anymore. And because I had to say to myself, what's driving you to do those things? Well, the activities with my daughters, I'm like, well, because I did them with my daughters. Well, are you really excited about doing them? No. Well, then why are you still doing them? Because you're not doing it with your daughters anymore. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I shouldn't be doing some of those things. Same thing at work. There's certain things that I'm not passionate about related to work anymore. And I need to stop those things. I need to leave those things so that I can focus my energy and my passion in those areas that I'm most passionate about in my work.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. So just to kind of continue, to maybe kind of pivot again, I think, of course, we're going to keep discovering that all these are related. We're going to have the wildest Venn diagram of all time here at the end. But one of the other things that you do in your coaching is focus on competence and developing information, and helping people really understand what they're doing. So clarity is a piece of it, understand what you're doing and why. But competence, is at least the way that I'm taking it. Is, actually taking the time to do some research, develop a little knowledge, become an expert in the space and so on. I wonder if you just take a minute and talk about sort of competence in the way that you coach it.
Yeah. Yeah. What I would do, let's say that I'm coaching a manager who wants to get more effective in working with their team in some way. I can ask that manager, what are those things that you want to be able to do well to be successful as a manager? And they can usually identify 3 or 4 key areas. And Ryan, I'm sorry, there's no silver bullet here. I will say to them, how do you think you could improve at those things, or what are the steps you think it would take to improve with those things? People know it is, you know what, if I took a minute to stop and think before I respond to that team member, okay, how do we practice that? Or you know what, Jones, I used to have a manager when I was with another company. They were amazing at this skill that I want to develop. Well, good. Could you have a conversation? Oh yeah, they'd love to talk about kind of what they did in that way. I think when we talk about competence, it's stopping to say, what do I want to be competent at, and what are the resources that I have around me that will help me get more competent in that arena, that area. And the hardest part, I think, for many people is raising their hand and saying, I'm not competent at that. I'm not good at that. I want to get better. That's one of the reasons why I think the coaching professional coaching has grown so much, is because people know they can say to that trusted, confidential person, they can say, you know, I suck at this and I want to get better.
Yeah.
And that person will question them and say, okay, how do you think you do that? Well, what I really think I ought to do, great, go do that. And let's talk about it in 2 weeks and let's see how it went. So I have a phrase that I use sometimes, and I think people know what they want to do or what they want to improve on. They just don't know how to get there. And they just don't have anybody to hold them accountable. And if somebody acts as a guide, which is what I think a coach is, if somebody acts as a guide and just ask them good questions, powerful questions to help them go, yeah, I could do that. I could try this. And then holds them accountable by asking them in the next coaching session, well, how'd that go, Ryan, when you asked that question to your team member instead of just saying you did this or you did that? That's what I think helps people develop that sustainable competence in something.
That's right. And what I like too about the way you laid that out is competence doesn't equal intelligence. It doesn't mean you're not
Correct.
smart. It doesn't mean that you're not
Bingo.
capable. It doesn't mean that you're not, any of these other traits, but what it means is maybe I don't have a complete understanding of this thing, or like what I had written down here while you were talking is, how do we know what we don't know?
Yeah.
It's like, maybe it requires a coach. Maybe it requires a friend. Maybe it requires a mentor. Maybe it's, some random stranger that you like their business. You want to ask them a question.
Yeah.
But that awareness, I guess, and even to use my own example, to be a little horn tooty myself, knowing that there's this invisible barrier that I'm running into is helping me even formulate the thoughts that, okay, well, I should be asking people, how do I get through this thing? Because maybe they've encountered it themselves, or maybe they have a way of thinking or a framework or something that I can use and apply for me to get through what I've recognized as my challenge. Right. And so, and I don't think I'm less than, or that I'm not capable or smart or, whatever, but I can recognize that this is somewhere where I'm short, and maybe I need to bring in a partner. Maybe I need to do it myself. Maybe I don't, but like having the, I guess, conversation with somebody, I think goes a long way. And so, but maybe to just kind of cap off that little bit of conversation, the other, third leg of this stool that you seem to focus on your energy and coaching on is confidence. And we talked about this a little bit, which was, developing maybe confidence or trust in ourselves. But I wonder if we couldn't talk a little bit about more, at least in your coaching practice, how do you go about helping people develop confidence in themselves? I imagine you can't force it on people. I imagine it's got to come from inside somewhere.
Well, I have a quote that I think I developed this, but I'm sure it's been said 20,000 different ways in the life of the universe. But I say people spend way too much time beating themselves up for what's not getting done instead of celebrating what is getting done. And I think that's true individually. I think it's true for teams. I think it's true for organizations. There's so much time and energy spent on all the things we aren't getting done instead of stopping to go, what is getting done? What is something that I should be celebrating, that I accomplished, that I did. And so I will simply start off, and this might not even be in a coaching session, Ryan. I have, my friends will tell you that I'm weird sometimes, but I might see a friend that I haven't seen in a couple of weeks and say, hey, tell me a win from today. And they'll look at me kind of funny. I'll say, no, tell me a win from today. And they'll say, I didn't yell at anybody at work. Yes, there we go. I'll get next to somebody on the plane and I'm sitting down, and before I put the AirPods in, I'll look at them and say, hey, how you, they'll say, we'll speak, do pleasure. I say, hey, what's a win for you today? And they'll think for a moment, they'll go, well, I had a great day. I finished this. I closed this deal. I did that. I think confidence starts with having other people remind you that you are doing some things well, and that you are achieving, you're being successful. And I think you do have to get other people to help you with that sometimes, because people get so hard on themselves, and they're focusing so much on what's not happening, what's going wrong. Is to find those people who you can surround yourself with, who see more in you than you see in yourself, and will remind you of that. So I think that's part of that process. Something else that I encourage my coaching clients to do is to journal each day, and to write down, 3 things that went well because of your efforts yesterday, or some question like that, to begin to connect. I did this, and because I did this, this turned out well, or it turned out better than if I hadn't been involved in it. And so it really, I think it's part of that routine that becomes a habit then, of reminding yourself, yeah, I showed up, I did this. This was the outcome. And of course, it's not always going to go well, but just looking for those opportunities to celebrate where you accomplish something, I think is so important.
Yeah, I think that's a huge mindset thing. And I think for a lot of people, it's funny, just the way society sort of handles things. I think a lot of people have a sort of default mode, which is to focus on that negative bit, right? And and I'm guilty of this. In fact, I had a call just before this that the guy pointed that out. He was like, "Well, you're talking about a lot of the things that you didn't do, but but also you've done this, and you've made this, and you've created that, and you've made this much money or whatever." It's like, so what are you worried about? It's like, why are you spending any time thinking about this stuff? It's like, but I'm just like that. And it's funny, I had a couple, just in the last couple of weeks, by random happenstance, we've had a couple British rock stars on the show. And so both of them are kind of people that had major hits that were like global sensations that still now 40 years later are big hits. Wow. And that was one of the things they pointed out specifically about British culture, is that they've got a little bit of this, pull the crab down in the bucket kind of thing. It's like, they call that, what do you call it? The tall poppy syndrome over there. You don't want to be the tall poppy. They're going to chop you down. And so, and I think that speaks to sort of the human nature component here, which is that everybody's sort of predisposed to the, negative version of whatever's going on in your life. And well, maybe not everybody, but many people are sort of predisposed to this version of life that's a little bit more through the negative lens. And then there's also this component in just sort of human nature, which is, I guess, maybe it's a jealousy, or maybe it's some other component where it's like, I don't want you to do better than me. And so it's like, wherever my frame is and whatever my level is, I don't want you to be better than me, because that makes me feel bad about me. Yeah. And so I think it's really, it's obviously a positive thing to develop some confidence around these things, but it's funny how much of our lack of confidence is actually just cultural and put on us. Meaning that we have the opportunity to take over, we have the opportunity to grab that and do something with it, like it's being imposed on us, and we're just going with the flow instead of, and maybe we can grab a hold of that one and take it back.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. No, I think it is so much of it is cultural, and you've got to be counterculture in that sense, and be willing to, celebrate your wins and tell other people about them, and get in the habit of it, and not from a bragging standpoint. I coach a lot of first time managers who are very intimidated by the person they report to. It's like, well, they always ask about the negative things or things that we aren't doing, and I just feel bad telling them about the positive things. I'm like, well, no, tell them how those positive things are going to positively impact the organization. Remind them of the connection. Tell them that, hey, I was successful at this, and I'm excited because this is going to help our team do this. It's not that you're saying, hey, look at me. You're saying, hey, look at what I was able to do that's going to help us move forward. I think it's always so important to give context when you're sharing a win, if you're afraid that somebody's going to, cut your poppy, as you would say.
Sure. Well, and I can even just sort of empathize or say that, like even in the example of like in my business and trying to maybe form some partnerships or involve other people in my idea, which is something that hadn't occurred to me at first to do. I have caught myself going, oh, okay, well, this guy's a really successful business guy. He's got more money than me. Like, we're not equals here. Like, this guy's showing up and he's bringing it. And, I had the idea and it's my thing and I kind of started it, but somehow the shit, the hierarchy here is a little bit funky. This guy's bringing it and he's got more money than me. And so maybe I need to, so I don't want to work with that guy because I don't want to feel less than or whatever. Right. And so to this notion of confidence, it's like, well, no, like, they are interested in your idea because you've included them in your idea. Like they may have success on their own or whatever, but here in this venture, Like, I mean, I guess short of them putting money in or something, but I mean, if you're just involving somebody like in maybe a mentorship capacity or something, it's like, no, you guys are like same level here. Like you both have interest in doing this thing. It's both day one for both of you. Like, you're everything before this doesn't matter, and so you can maybe allow yourself to have some confidence in these kinds of things, because it's these petty things that end up causing, maybe you don't get the best help because you don't want to be second fiddle to the guy with the millions in the bank, or you don't want to, I mean, whatever other business example you can come up with, but I think there's plenty of examples where an individual's lack of confidence changes the choice, to go back to the top of the podcast here and you go back to choice. It affects the way that we make our decisions or the way that we choose based on these little things like lack of confidence or lack of competence. And, so it's funny how all these things kind of play into the same problem, which is, how do we move forward until we sort of solve ourselves, I guess, put a nice little bow on it.
Right. Well, and just to maybe put some, I'll put icing on the cupcake. We'll put it that way. Is a few years ago when I was first getting into professional coaching, I read the book, The Prosperous Coach. Great book about a coach who's wildly successful. And it was interesting because he said one of the problems that new coaches have, is being willing to speak up and say, I'm a coach and I can help you. I mean, that's the ultimate in confidence, right? Is being able to say, I believe I can help you move forward in the ways that are important to you. And he said that one of the ways he overcame that was when his friends would be talking about something that it sounded like, some coaching would help with that. Or if he was at a business meeting, he would simply say to them, I'd love to help. I'd love to help with that. And he said they would say, oh, well, thank you, Joe or John, whoever guy wrote the book. And he'd say, well, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, I do some coaching and I'd love to see if I can help you with that. To me, that's the ultimate in confidence, is when you can say, I'd love to help with that. I'd love to partner with you. I'd love to explore that idea further. And you should, because for the very reasons you just mentioned, Ryan, we've got all these talents, abilities, experiences that have helped us be this amazing individual who has much to offer, whether it's a British rock star or whether it's an entrepreneur just starting out. We got to be willing to bring that to the table and stand up for ourselves so that we can move forward, with our businesses or our lives in a way that aligns with our goals and our outcomes.
Yeah. Well, and I think to tie that back to Bob Burg's thing, the whole notion is that you give more of yourself than you take. And it does require a little bit of confidence. You do need to do that, but also it's also just a little bit human. You just sort of are willing to give, and you're willing to be kind, and you're willing to be generous, and you're willing to do all these different things. And maybe that requires a little bit of confidence, but it also requires working on yourself and being in a spot where you're able to give just emotionally, whether it's anything else, or whether it has to deal with, other life balance that you're trying to build in, taking care of your family, your friends, your neighbors, et cetera, or just being a good steward in your business, taking care of your employees and whatever else. So I think that, to take it full circle, I think we nailed it. Go team. I love it. Well, hey, Jones, we are getting to the end of the hour. Let's, where can people reach out to you, learn more about the new book, if they want to maybe talk to you about speaking or any other capacity of doing work with you?
Yeah, thanks for that, Ryan. First place I would invite your listeners to go to is actually LinkedIn. Look me up on LinkedIn. Just type in Jones Loflin in your search box, and I come up. I put content out pretty much every day at LinkedIn around some of the same kinds of things we talked about today. And I just welcome the opportunity to connect on LinkedIn, because then I get to see what you're doing in your world and see what opportunities might be for us to partner in some way. And if there's something that you need as an entrepreneur and you say, hey, Jones, anybody in your network who might can help with that, then I get that opportunity to connect folks. I love those opportunities. Of course, they can go to Amazon.com and type in my name and see any of the books that I've written there, or my website, jonesloflin.com. But those would be three of the places, Ryan, that I would suggest that they start.
Awesome. That's great. And just for people's reference, it's Loflin, Loflin, not the long many extra letters version. So it's nice and easy to find it. Just Jones Loflin, Jones Loflin. And so, well, thank you so much, Jones. It's been awesome. Great conversation. Really good to get to know you. And I think we had a lot of value for the listeners today. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ryan, and thanks for the work that you and Mike are doing to help us all be more effective in our businesses. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And thanks so much to everybody who tunes in the show this week and every week. And see you next time.